"Where'd you steal that phone?" The female officer snapped at a black teen walking with his brand new iPhone. He explained he'd saved for months at his part-time job, but she didn't believe a word. She shoved him against the hot hood of her car, snapped on the cuffs and dragged him away like a thief. No one spoke up. An hour later, she realized the teen she dragged away was the mayor's son, and his father's response would shake the entire city. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Jamal Washington walked down Oak Street with his head high and earbuds in, the latest Drake album pumping through his brand new iPhone 15 Pro. The afternoon sun caught the titanium finish of the phone as he scrolled through messages from his girlfriend, a small smile playing on his lips. He'd saved for 8 months from his part-time job at the electronics store to buy this phone, working every weekend and holiday to afford it. Jamal was a good kid, honor roll student, varsity basketball player, college-bound with a partial scholarship to state. But as he walked through the predominantly white neighborhood where his aunt lived, none of that mattered to Officer Betty Doyle, who was cruising slowly in her patrol car. Doyle's beady eyes locked onto the expensive device in the young black man's hands, and her lips twisted into a familiar sneer. She'd been having a bad week, 3 complaints filed against her for excessive force and a mandatory sensitivity training session she'd been forced to attend. She was looking for someone to take her frustrations out on, and Jamal looked like the perfect target. She pulled her cruiser to the curb and stepped out, her stocky frame moving with aggressive purpose. "Hey, you," she barked, her voice cutting through the quiet afternoon air. Jamal pulled out one earbud and turned around, confused. He'd been taught by his parents to always be respectful to police officers, even when they didn't deserve it. "Yes, ma'am," he said politely, stopping in his tracks. "That's a brand new phone," Doyle said, stepping closer with her hand resting on her belt. "Latest model. You expect me to believe a kid like you can afford something that expensive?" The insult hit Jamal like a slap. He could feel the eyes of the white residents watching from their perfect lawns and pristine porches, their faces a mixture of curiosity and judgment. None of them looked like they planned to help. "A kid like me," he fought to keep his voice steady. "Ma'am, I work at Tech World downtown. I saved up for months to buy this phone." "Tech World, huh?" Doyle's voice dripped with disbelief as she moved closer, invading his personal space. "What do you do there? Sweep floors?" Mrs. Patterson, an elderly white woman tending her rose garden, looked up at the commotion but quickly averted her eyes when Doyle glanced her way. Across the street, Mr. Henderson stopped watering his lawn but made no move to intervene, choosing instead to watch from a safe distance. Jamal felt his face flush with anger and humiliation, but he forced himself to stay calm. "I'm in sales, ma'am. I help customers choose the right devices for their needs." "Sales?" Officer Doyle let out a harsh laugh, raising her voice so the watching neighbors could hear every word. "Right, and I suppose you just happened to save up enough money to buy the most expensive phone on the market. Fresh off the shelf?" "Yes, ma'am, I did." Jamal's voice was getting tighter despite his efforts to remain respectful. "Is there a law against working and saving money?" Officer Doyle's face darkened at what she perceived as attitude. "Don't get smart with me, boy. I'm going to need to see some identification and proof of purchase for that device." Proof of purchase? Jamal couldn't hide his disbelief anymore. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you can't just stop people and demand they prove they own their belongings." "I can when those belongings look suspicious," Doyle snapped. "A kid from your neighborhood walking around with a phone that costs more than most people make in a month. That raises red flags." Jamal's hands started to shake with anger. "My neighborhood? You don't even know where I live." "I know exactly what kind of neighborhood produces kids like you," Officer Doyle said, her prejudice now fully on display. "The kind where expensive electronics just fall off trucks, if you know what I mean." By now more residents had emerged from their houses, drawn by the raised voices. Unlike in other neighborhoods, these onlookers seemed uncomfortable with the confrontation, but their discomfort manifested as silence rather than support. They watched like it was a show, but none of them stepped forward to help. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly white woman from the corner house, watched from her porch with her arms crossed. She'd seen Jamal walk to his aunt's house many times before, a polite young man who always waved respectfully. But now faced with confronting a police officer, she remained silent. "I'm going to need to verify your story," Officer Doyle said, her tone still maddeningly reasonable. That means I'll need to see some identification, and I'd like you to come with me to the station so we can sort this out properly. Come to the station. Jamal's careful composure finally began to crack. Ma'am, I haven't committed any crime. You can't just arrest someone for having a nice phone. I'm not arresting you, Officer Doyle said smoothly. I'm asking for your voluntary cooperation in an investigation, unless you have something to hide. It was a perfect trap. If he refused, she'd claim he was being uncooperative and suspicious. If he agreed, he'd be voluntarily going to a place where she had complete control over the situation. I don't have anything to hide, Jamal said carefully, but I also don't think I should have to prove my innocence when I haven't been accused of a specific crime. Well, now I am accusing you of a specific crime, Officer Doyle said, her mask finally slipping just slightly. I believe that phone is stolen property, possibly from your place of employment. Are you willing to come with me voluntarily to clear this up, or do I need to place you under arrest? The watching neighbors stirred uneasily. Even from their distance, they could sense that something about this interaction wasn't quite right, but Officer Doyle's professional demeanor made it difficult to pinpoint exactly what was wrong. If you're arresting me, I want to call my parents, Jamal said, his voice shaking now. Of course, Officer Doyle agreed readily. You can call them from the station after we get this sorted out. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. As she moved toward him with the handcuffs, Mr. Henderson across the street quietly pulled out his phone and started recording. Something about the whole interaction had struck him as off, and his instincts told him this might be important to document. Actually, yes, Jamal said, his voice gaining strength. I have a basketball scholarship to State University starting in the fall. Officer Doyle's expression showed she didn't believe a word of it. To her, young black men were criminals first and everything else second. The idea that this teenager could be successful and accomplished didn't fit her worldview. Turn around and put your hands on the car, she ordered, moving toward her patrol vehicle. But as Jamal hesitated, she grabbed his shoulder and spun him around violently, slamming him face first against the hot metal of her patrol car. What? Why? Jamal gasped, the scorching metal burning his cheek. I haven't done anything wrong. You're in possession of what I suspect is stolen property. Doyle snarled, pressing his face harder against the car while the watching neighbors did nothing. And now you're resisting a lawful investigation. The metal was so hot from sitting in the sun that it left red marks on Jamal's face, but Officer Doyle kept pressing. I'm not resisting anything, Jamal protested, his voice muffled against the car. Fine, here's my phone. Look up TechWorld's number and call my manager Mike Chen. He'll tell you I bought this phone with my employee discount. But Officer Doyle wasn't interested in facts that might contradict her assumptions. She grabbed the phone from his hand and deliberately let it fall to the pavement. Oops, she said with mock concern, then stepped on it with her full weight, grinding her boot heel into the screen until it completely shattered. My phone, Jamal cried out in anguish, watching 8 months of savings destroyed in seconds. You did that on purpose. Accidents happen, Officer Doyle said with a cruel smile, kicking the broken pieces into the gutter. Should have been more careful with your stolen goods. Officer Doyle applied the handcuffs with professional efficiency, not tight enough to cause obvious injury, but snug enough to ensure compliance. Her years of experience had taught her exactly how much pressure she could apply without crossing legal lines. These feel a bit tight, Jamal said as she guided him toward the patrol car. Standard procedure, Officer Doyle replied matter-of-factly. They're supposed to be secure, as she opened the rear door and helped him into the vehicle. Again, following proper protocol to the letter, she leaned close enough to speak quietly. You know, son, this could all be cleared up very easily if you just tell me the truth about where you really got that phone. It was perfectly calculated, no witnesses could hear her words, and to any observer, it would look like she was simply explaining procedure or offering comfort. Inside the patrol car, Jamal sat in frustrated silence. The handcuffs weren't cutting off circulation, but they were uncomfortable enough to be a constant reminder of his powerlessness. Every aspect of his treatment was technically correct, yet the entire situation felt fundamentally wrong. Officer, he said through the partition, I've told you the truth. I bought the phone legally with my own money. You can verify this in about 10 minutes with a phone call. We'll do a thorough investigation, Officer Doyle assured him, starting the engine. The truth has a way of coming out. What she didn't tell him was that her version of thorough investigation would involve hours of delay, deliberate inefficiency, and psychological pressure designed to make him confess to a crime he didn't commit. Meanwhile, from across the street Mr. Henderson continued filming, his instincts telling him that something about this arrest was deeply wrong, even though he couldn't put his finger on exactly what. Officer Doyle opened the back door of her patrol car and placed her hand on top of Jamal's head, ostensibly to protect him from hitting the door frame. A standard police procedure, but as she guided him into the vehicle, she accidentally pushed his head down harder than necessary, causing him to bump against the door frame. "Watch your head," she said loudly for any neighbors who might be listening, though she'd been the one controlling the movement. "Ow," Jamal said quietly, more confused than hurt. The bump wasn't severe, but it was clearly intentional. "Should have been more careful," Officer Doyle muttered, making sure he heard her lack of sympathy. As she closed the door, Jamal found himself trapped in the back of the patrol car, his hands uncomfortably restrained behind him. The handcuffs weren't cutting off circulation completely, but they were tight enough to make his hands tingle and his shoulders ache from the unnatural position. "Please," he said through the partition, "can you at least call my parents, or call TechWorld to verify my story?" Officer Doyle looked at him in the rearview mirror with cold satisfaction. "We'll verify everything at the station," she said, though they both knew she had no intention of making those calls. "Until then you can sit there and think about the choices you made." The casual cruelty of her indifference was almost worse than overt brutality. She wasn't going to beat him. She didn't need to. She had all the power, and she was going to use every bit of it to make him suffer within the bounds of what she could justify later. As she pushed Jamal's head down to force him into the back seat, his new iPhone clattered to the pavement. The expensive device that had started this whole encounter now lay on the asphalt, its pristine screen spider webbing with cracks. "My phone," Jamal cried out, watching months of hard work literally shattered on the street. "You broke my phone. Should have thought about that before you decided to steal it," Officer Doyle said callously, deliberately stepping on the damaged device with her heavy boot, grinding it into the pavement. The few neighbors who were still watching from their windows saw the deliberate destruction of property, but not one of them came outside to help or protest. Their silence was as loud as any shout of approval, but she was too committed to back down now. "This suspect was in possession of expensive electronics he couldn't account for," she announced loudly. When questioned he became hostile and evasive. "He was respectful the entire time," Mrs. Henderson protested, "and he offered to show you his receipt." Inside the patrol car, Jamal listened to the neighbors defending him with a mixture of gratitude and despair. At least someone could see the truth of what was happening, but it didn't change the fact that he was still handcuffed in the back of a police car for the crime of walking while black with a nice phone. 20 minutes later, Jamal sat in the juvenile holding area at the Riverside police station, still in handcuffs. The desk sergeant, Sergeant Williams, had looked uncomfortable when Officer Doyle brought him in. "What's the charge, Betty?" Williams had asked, eyeing the well-dressed, clean-cut teeth. "Possession of stolen property, resisting arrest," Doyle had replied automatically. "What property?" "iPhone 15 Pro. Kid claims he bought it, but you know how that goes." Sergeant Williams had frowned. "Did you verify his story? He'll have plenty of time to prove his innocence," Doyle had said dismissively before walking away. Now Jamal sat alone trying to process what had happened. He'd been walking down the street, minding his own business, and now he was in jail. The handcuffs had been removed, but the humiliation and anger burned in his chest. "Can I please call my parents?" he asked, the next officer who passed by. "Let me check with the arresting officer," came the reply. But when Officer Doyle was asked, she shook her head. "Kid's got an attitude problem. Let him cool off for a while first." It was another hour before Jamal was finally allowed to make his phone call. His hands shook as he dialed his father's number, not his mother's, because this seemed like something his dad needed to handle. "Dad?" His voice cracked when the familiar voice answered. "Jamal, son, what's wrong? You sound upset." "Dad, I'm at the police station. I got arrested." The silence on the other end was deafening. Then in a voice Jamal had never heard his father use before. "Arrested? For what? Where are you?" "Riverside Police Station. Dad, I didn't do anything wrong. I was just walking to Aunt Carol's house and this police officer saw my iPhone and accused me of stealing it." "Your iPhone? The one you saved up to buy?" "Yes. She said there was no way someone like me could afford it legitimately, and when I tried to explain she arrested me." Dad, she broke my phone. She stepped on it on purpose. Jamal heard his father take a deep, controlled breath. When David Washington spoke again, his voice carried the authority of someone used to being in charge. Son, listen to me carefully. Do not say another word to anyone until I get there. Not one word. Do you understand me? Yes, sir. I'm calling the family lawyer and we're coming to get you right now. This is going to be handled properly. Dad, I'm scared. I know, son, but you don't need to be scared anymore. Your father is the mayor of this city and this stops now. Mayor David Washington arrived at the police station 25 minutes later, his presence immediately changing the atmosphere in the building. He wasn't just any concerned parent. He was the elected leader of the city and everyone in the building knew it. Behind him walked the family's attorney Maria Gonzalez, her briefcase in hand and her expression deadly serious. I'm here for my son Jamal Washington, David announced to the desk sergeant, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of authority. Sergeant Williams nearly dropped his coffee when he realized who was standing in front of him. Mayor Washington, sir, let me get Captain Moore immediately. You'll get the arresting officer first, David said firmly. I want to speak with whoever decided to arrest my 17-year-old son. Within minutes the station was buzzing with nervous energy. Captain Moore appeared first, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Mayor Washington, she said carefully. I wasn't aware that the juvenile brought in was your son. Well, now you are. David replied coldly. Where is Officer Doyle? When Officer Doyle finally appeared, her swagger faltered the moment she saw who was waiting for her. The stocky officer who had been so confident bullying a teenager suddenly looked very small in the presence of the city's mayor. Officer Doyle. David's voice was ice cold. I understand you arrested my son for the crime of owning a phone he purchased legally. Sir, the boy was in possession of expensive electronics and couldn't adequately explain. Stop. David held up his hand. My son is an honor roll student with a part-time job and a college scholarship. He saved his money for 8 months to buy that phone. What part of that couldn't he adequately explain? Maria Gonzalez stepped forward, pulling out her tablet. Officer Doyle, I have copies of Jamal's employment records, pay stubs, bank statements showing his savings pattern, and the receipt for his purchase. Would you like to review them? Officer Doyle's face was turning red. Sir, I had reasonable suspicion. David's voice rose and every officer in the building could hear him. Reasonable suspicion of what? Working hard and saving money, being black in a white neighborhood. Mayor Washington, Captain Moore interjected. Perhaps we could discuss this in my office. No, David said firmly. We're going to discuss this right here, right now. Officer Doyle, did you have any evidence that my son's phone was stolen? Well, no, but did you verify his story about purchasing it before arresting him? He seemed evasive. That's not what I asked. Did you verify his story? Officer Doyle's silence was answer enough. David turned to Captain Moore. Captain, I want my son released immediately, and I want a full investigation into this officer's conduct. This is not just about my family. This is about how your department treats young black men in our community. An hour later, Jamal was finally released into his parents' custody. Officer Doyle had disappeared somewhere into the depths of the police station, leaving Captain Moore to handle the paperwork and face the mayor's wrath. This isn't over, David said as they prepared to leave. I want a full investigation, and I want Officer Doyle's badge on my desk by tomorrow. Mayor Washington, Captain Moore said carefully. Due process requires due process. David's voice carried through the entire station. Where was due process when that officer arrested my son without evidence? Where was due process when she destroyed his personal property? Maria Gonzalez stepped forward with her business card. Captain Moore, you'll be hearing from us formally tomorrow. We'll be filing complaints with Internal Affairs, the Civilian Review Board, and the State Attorney General's office. In the car on the way home, Jamal stared out the window in silence. The whole experience had shattered something inside him. His faith in fairness, his belief that his father's position could protect their family from the worst of racism. You okay, son? David asked, glancing at his boy in the rear-view mirror. I don't understand, Jamal said quietly. I did everything right. I was respectful. I offered to prove the phone was mine. I didn't resist or fight back. But she treated me like I was a criminal anyway. David pulled the car over and turned to face his son. Jamal, this wasn't about anything you did or didn't do. This was about that officer's prejudices. But you're the mayor, Dad. Doesn't that mean anything? David's face was grim. Son, it means I have the power to fight this and make sure there are consequences. But it doesn't change the fact that this happened to you in the first place. So what am I supposed to do? Jamal asked, his voice cracking. Never buy nice things. Always carry receipts for everything I own. Except that I'll be treated like a criminal no matter what I accomplish. No. David said firmly. You're going to continue being the amazing young man you are. And I'm going to use every bit of power I have as mayor to make sure this never happens to another child in our city. The video Mr. Patterson had recorded was posted online the next morning, and by afternoon it was spreading across social media platforms. The sight of a respectful teenager being arrested for owning a phone he'd legitimately purchased struck a nerve with viewers across the country. Local news stations picked up the story, and by evening, Jamal found himself sitting across from a reporter telling his story to a television camera. I just want people to understand that I'm not a criminal, Jamal said, his voice steady despite the cameras. I work hard, I get good grades, and I saved my money to buy something I wanted. That shouldn't be a crime. The reporter, Maria Santos, nodded sympathetically. What would you say to Officer Doyle if she were watching this interview? Jamal thought for a moment. I'd ask her to try to see me as a person instead of a stereotype. I'd ask her to consider how it feels to be judged not by your actions or your character, but by the color of your skin. The interview generated even more attention, and by the end of the week, Jamal's story had become a rallying point for discussions about racial profiling and police reform. Detective Chen's investigation revealed exactly what Captain Moore had feared. Officer Doyle had a clear pattern of targeting young black men using nearly identical methods. Her reports were always meticulously written, technically correct, and legally defensible, but they told a disturbing story of systematic harassment disguised as proper police work. There was Marcus Williams, 19, stopped for suspicious behavior while walking through an upscale neighborhood. According to Doyle's report, he was evasive and uncooperative when questioned about expensive sneakers he was wearing. The video from Henderson's neighbor, who had also recorded that incident 6 months earlier, showed a polite young man respectfully answering all questions before being arrested for disorderly conduct when he asked why he was being detained. There was Kevin Thompson, 16, arrested for loitering with intent outside a GameStop where he worked. Doyle's report described him as argumentative and resistant to lawful orders. Security footage from the store showed him calmly explaining that he was on his break and offering to call his manager to verify his employment. In every case, Officer Doyle had used the same psychological tactics: reasonable initial questioning that slowly escalated into accusations, turning the person's cooperation against them, and using technically legal procedures to justify arrests that served no purpose other than harassment. The scary thing, Detective Chen told Captain Moore, is how good she is at this. Every arrest is legally sound. Every report reads like textbook police work. If you didn't have video evidence, you'd think these were all legitimate arrests of uncooperative suspects. But we do have video evidence, Captain Moore replied grimly. And it tells a very different story. The most damning piece of evidence came from Henderson's footage. The audio was clear enough to hear Officer Doyle's entire conversation with Jamal, including her strategic use of leading questions and her gradual escalation from friendly inquiry to hostile interrogation. Her methods were so sophisticated that they bordered on psychological manipulation. She never actually said anything explicitly racist, Chen noted. But listen to how she phrases things: someone your age, kids like you, your kind of neighborhood. She's communicating her assumptions without ever stating them directly. Captain Moore watched the video one more time, focusing on Officer Doyle's body language and timing. This isn't bias, she said finally. This is predatory behavior. She's hunting. After Jamal's arrest became public knowledge, Riverside found itself divided in ways that many residents had never openly acknowledged. Officer Doyle's supporters didn't remain silent, they organized. The day after the mayor's press conference, a group of residents from Brookhaven and similar neighborhoods held their own gathering. Diane Patterson, energized by what she saw as an attack on law and order, stepped forward as an unofficial spokesperson. "We support Officer Doyle, 100%, Diane declared to the small crowd of about 30 people gathered in Brookhaven Park. She was doing her job protecting our community from suspicious activity. Just because someone's father happens to be mayor doesn't mean they're above the law." The crowd murmured agreement, though several people looked uncomfortable with the implicit assumptions in her words. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 15 years, continued Robert Mitchell, a retired engineer. "We've worked hard to build a safe, stable community. When we see someone who doesn't belong here acting suspiciously, we expect our police to investigate." "Exactly," Diane added. "And now they want to punish Officer Doyle for doing exactly what we pay her to do, keep us safe." When local news crews arrived to cover the counter-demonstration, Diane was ready with talking points that sounded reasonable on the surface but carried darker implications. "This isn't about race," she insisted to the cameras. "This is about supporting our police officers who risk their lives to protect us every day." Officer Doyle followed proper procedures. She saw suspicious behavior and investigated. "That's good police work." Behind the cameras, the crowd nodded and applauded, giving Diane confidence to go further. "We can't let political correctness prevent our officers from doing their jobs," she continued. "If we second-guess every arrest, if we make our police afraid to investigate suspicious activity, then criminals will know they can do whatever they want in our neighborhoods." The news segment that evening showed both sides. Mayor Washington's measured call for accountability and justice, contrasted with Diane Patterson's passionate defense of traditional law enforcement. To viewers unfamiliar with the details, both positions could sound reasonable. This public support emboldened Officer Doyle herself. In a carefully crafted statement released through the police union, she portrayed herself as a dedicated officer being unfairly persecuted. "I have served this community faithfully for 12 years," her statement read. "On the day in question, I observed suspicious behavior and investigated according to proper police protocols. I treated the suspect with respect and followed all departmental procedures. It's unfortunate that political pressure is now being used to second-guess legitimate police work." 3 months later, Jamal stood at a podium in the Riverside Community Center, addressing a packed room as part of a forum on police-community relations. "I want to be clear," he said, his voice confident and strong. "I don't hate police officers. I understand they have a difficult job, and I respect the many officers who serve with integrity and fairness." He paused, looking out at the diverse crowd that included several police officers. "But what happened to me shouldn't happen to anyone. Being accused of theft because you own something nice, being arrested because you fit someone's prejudiced assumptions about who belongs where, that's not policing, that's profiling." In the audience, Jamal's parents watched with pride as their son turned his traumatic experience into a powerful voice for change. "I'm heading to State University in the fall," Jamal continued. "I'm going to study criminal justice, and someday, I hope to work in law enforcement myself. But I want to be part of the solution, part of building a system where everyone is treated with dignity and respect regardless of their race or where they come from." The applause was thunderous. Officer Betty Doyle was terminated from the Riverside Police Department after a formal hearing that found her guilty of discriminatory policing practices. She never publicly acknowledged wrongdoing, instead claiming she was being persecuted for doing her job. Jamal started his freshman year at State University on a full academic scholarship. His story and advocacy work had impressed admissions officers and led to additional funding. He declared a double major in criminal justice and communications, with plans to reform policing from within the system. The cracked iPhone 15 Pro sat in a frame on his desk in his dorm room, not as a symbol of injustice, but as a reminder of his own resilience and the power of speaking truth to power. And sometimes, when his roommate asked about the broken phone in the fancy frame, Jamal would smile and say, "That's the most expensive phone I ever bought. And the most important purchase I ever made. It taught me that standing up for what's right is always worth it, even when it's hard." Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.